All right, Scott Mayausky, Commissioner of the Revenue in Stafford County, Virginia. Scott, thank you for coming on and talking with us today about the recent 2024 property assessments. As anyone who lives in Stafford County knows, those assessments hit their mailboxes over these past week and a half. And for many, they were, like, including myself, they were eye-popping. I think the average for residential home was assessed at, on average, 13% higher than it was 2 years ago. So we'll have a few questions for you about how this process works and
Sure.
why we do it, and what should happen next now that we see the numbers and we see what homes and commercial properties are worth. So increased assessments, I think it's 13% on average for residential homes. And you said 23, was it 23% for commercial properties that went up on average?
Yeah, that's correct.
And so we know that these assessments take place every 2 years, and we know that they're used to obviously value the homes and properties within a jurisdiction. But they're so important in Virginia because for localities, for local governments, the real estate tax rate is the number one source of revenue for these local governments. I'm sure there's some state funding, sure there's federal funding, but as far as county goes in Virginia, they get their money on the backs of homeowners, especially if the county or city does not have a strong commercial tax base, as like a Fairfax County or something like that. So let's the real and simple question is this just a case of supply and demand? Uh, does that explain why these assessments went up so much over the past 2 years?
Yeah, I think it is. And I probably shouldn't admit this, but when I'm talking to my appraisers and they're giving me the final numbers, I was just as surprised as the homeowners were. Because it doesn't feel like the market is really that strong. In 2006 and 7, everybody knew the market was going up, but with interest rates being high, it just didn't feel that way now. So I was a little surprised as well, but I think it is simply supply and demand. If you talk to most realtors, they'll tell you the supply of houses on the market is extremely low. So that is driving up the value of the houses that are there, and that's been a several year process or problem with the real estate market. And that's why we're seeing the values rise, even though the interest rates might be higher than what we're used to, and quite frankly, what many people are comfortable with.
So to make what would cause property values to go down? And that may, that people may not want that, right? You want to live in a growing area. You want to know where an area is prospering and people are interested in moving to. But what would cause property values to stabilize, or maybe what would prevent the same type of increase in the next 2 years in 2026 when we open up these assessments again? What would slow the rate of increase or maybe hold it, keep it at bay?
Yeah, well, I'm no economist, but I do a lot of reading, and a lot of folks believe that when the interest rates come down, that there's a pent up seller's market. People don't want to sell their house now because they're afraid that they won't get top dollar because the interest rates are so high. So they're holding on to their house, and that's having the effect of limiting the supply and driving values up, ironically. That once the rates come down, you could see a flood of houses going on the market, and then that could have the opposite effect of what the homeowner thinks and bring those values down, because now you've got competition. You've got a lot of houses in the market, and buyers, have choices, and they can, instead of chasing a house value because it's the only house in the neighborhood, now there's 10 houses, they can be more particular. Then you get sellers, competing against each other, and that will drive down property values. But you made a good point. Some folks may not want values to go down. It is all on your perspective and where you stand currently in the real estate market. My kids are in their early 20s. I worry every single day about how they're going to get into this market. So from their perspective, I'm very concerned about the rising prices.
Yeah, I mean, it's so I know that we probably couldn't. I mean, we've been in our home for 10 years, and we live in Stafford County, and we could not move here today,
Yeah,
knowing what the values are. And so if interest rates don't come down, right? If nothing changes, if we stay on the current trajectory, should people expect to again see these numbers, these assessments continually go up like this?
I keep saying no, and I keep being proven wrong. You would think there's got to be some end point where people just can't afford something. We have homes in Embry Mill, which is a great neighborhood, but we have homes in Embry Mill selling for $1 million, which I don't think anybody would have ever anticipated. When you think of $1 million house 5, 10 years ago, it's an estate, it's a mansion somewhere, but that's not what it is in this current market. There's got to be some upper limit to that. Logically, there just has to be. I don't know where that is, however.
I want to ask you about this truth in taxation. We reported that you addressed the Board of County Supervisors and talked to them about this. Essentially, what happens now is the board is going to have to advertise a tax rate in order to fund its fiscal year 2025 budget. That budget takes effect on July 1st. They have to figure out at what tax rate and it currently sits at 94 cents of every $100. Maybe it's 94.5 if you want to get technical, but about 90, we'll save 94 cents of every $100 of value on a home. And they're talking about lowering that rate to sort of offset some of the effects of this higher assessment. They're talking about different rates, 91, 93, 89. But when you talk about truth in taxation, uh, explain what that means and sort of tell us what the supervisors have before them. They get the information from you, and now they have a job to do.
Sure. That term, I've been talking about that term for 20 years, but now I know that nobody used to listen to what I say because all of a sudden it's caught a lot of interest. And I think a large part of that is because now Senator Durant passed a bill last year that required us to put the effective rate on the reassessment notice. So that what the effective rate is, it is a formula that is placed in the state code. It's mandatory that if you have a reassessment and your values increase by more than 1%, you have to calculate the rate that would basically offset the effects of that reassessment. So what that does is it places the burden of tax increases on the board and the tax rate and not the assessment office and the values of the property. So we calculated the effective rate, including the fire levy, to be at 84 cents. So what that means is any tax rate the board wants above 84 cents is a tax increase, and they have to advertise and have a public hearing.
So they will advertise their advertised rate, whatever that's going to be, on March
Yes.
5th. Now they can lower that rate after March 5th and into April when they're expected to approve the final budget. They have to have their budget in by June into the state. But at any rate, so what you're saying is anything over 84 cents, the supervisors automatically know that that's going to be a tax increase on the people who live in the county. Is that correct?
They should know that. But it gets very confusing even when the county administrator was presenting and on the county's website now. And I think it's all, innocent. It's a difficult concept for some folks to understand. They talk about cutting the rate from 94 cents from last year. Well, you're not cutting the rate. If you were cutting the rate, you wouldn't be required to advertise. So it's important to understand that unlike an income tax rate, which will carry forward from year to year until the governing body changes it, a real estate rate resets every single year. So when you have that reassessment, it resets at that effective rate, and it doesn't just carry through with the prior year's rate.
How does Stafford compare to other jurisdictions? If you're looking at data, if you're looking at other counties, the surrounding counties that directly border Stafford, we're talking Prince William, Fauquier, Culpeper, Spotsylvania, King George, and obviously the city of Fredericksburg. Is this the most expensive place to live outside of Prince William County? Obviously, we know Prince William's more expensive, but in terms of the other jurisdictions, as you look west, south, and east, is Stafford sort of the most expensive place?
Yeah, I think unfortunately it is, but it kind of follows the logical progression of what you would expect. The more suburban, urban a county is becoming, the higher their tax rate needs to be. So we're considerably higher than Fauquier, but they don't have the pressures on the schools and the transportation systems that we do. So yes, being the furthest county north, kind of in the Fredericksburg region, we also carry with us the highest real estate tax rate. Another part of that is we're still trying to play catch up with our commercial tax base. We're the largest locality in the state that does not have a business license tax. I'm not advocating for one, but we don't have that revenue coming in. So that has to be made up with a couple pennies on the real estate rate, which primarily has to come from our homeowners. So a combination of our needs and kind of our tax structure gives us the highest tax rate in the Fredericksburg region.
And as you talk about catching up with the commercial real estate, the commercial tax base in the county, that's a nice segue into these data centers, right? We know that Amazon is going to build at least 4 data centers. I'm hearing possibly more if some dominoes fall into place, but we know at least 4 are coming to Stafford. The first of which will be built next to the hospital, Stafford Hospital, as part of a deal this Board of Supervisors approved earlier this year with with Amazon in exchange for the company essentially coming in and redoing a large portion of the water system to be able to accommodate these data centers and other users as well. So it's kind of like rising tides raise all boats in that respect. But there's been a lot of talk, and you have certainly been bullish on these data centers coming in and providing more tax revenue for all sorts of county government operations, schools, and what have you. Just to the north in Prince William County in December, they approved the PW Digital Gateway. It's 1,000 acres of land that will be all data centers next to the Manassas National Battlefield. And that's in addition to many other data center projects that have come online in Prince William County, just outside of Manassas, in the past 5 years. And they are soon, with that PW Digital Gateway, they're going to take the crown from neighboring Loudoun County, and they will be the largest data center hub in the world in Prince William County, taking that crown from Loudoun. So Stafford's obviously not there yet, but when we talk about the revenues that we're going to see, it also comes as residents of Prince William County are facing yet another real estate tax hike, despite all of that data center activity. They're facing, if their budget goes approved, the proposed that the county executive's budget goes through, the average real estate tax bill in that county is up by $243. And again, despite all the data center tax rates. So why are we bullish on data centers here in Stafford County? And will we really see that revenue that's been promised to help lower some of the county's tax burden residents?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So a lot of it has to do with scale. Now our budget is considerably smaller than Loudoun County and Prince William County. So, if you generate $150 million in Loudoun or Prince William, it doesn't have nearly the same impact that we do here in Stafford County. For example, our property tax, which we talked about, which is really, when we talk about property tax, it's primarily a combination of real estate, which is the bulk of it, but also the car tax. So between those two, we generate about $240 million in the county. Now, there's a 500-acre tract that is being discussed for a data center here in Stafford on Route 1. The revenue projection I've seen from that at full build out are $120 million. So that is what, a third, more than that, almost half of our current tax base.
And is that over that 120? Is that over time, or is that an annual? Is that annually?
No, that would be annually. Now it's a little tricky because unlike most businesses, that revenue is primarily driven by computer equipment. most businesses, it's the real estate that drives the tax revenue. Here, it's not. You know, they'll build a $40 million building, which is great. And then they'll put $1 billion worth of computer equipment in it. And that has a depreciation schedule. So year one, you'll generate that full load and then it will depreciate down pretty quickly. And then you have to wait for them to refresh that data. So you have to be careful when you're budgeting that data because it's not a consistent, steady stream every year. So ideally what you want is a number of data centers in a perfect world, all on a different replacement cycle so that it can stabilize your revenue stream over time. But for us, a project of that size is magnitudes larger in terms of tax revenue than it is in Prince William or Loudoun County.
And what you're saying is essentially there are 472,000 people. It's quickly approaching 500,000 people who live in Prince William County,
Yes.
whereas Stafford County's population far fewer at about 165,000 since I last checked anyway. So what you're saying is the dollar goes farther in Stafford because there are far fewer people to serve with those dollars. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a much more eloquent way to put it, but yes, that's exactly right.
Well,
Well, and it's also priorities. I do have some concern that we're going to get all of this data center revenue in, and it's magically going to get spent on something other than tax relief. Now, my argument would be there's enough money to meet our needs and provide much needed tax relief, but that's the board's priorities as to how that money is spent. And I don't want to disparage Prince Williams County's board, but I wonder how much tax relief is in the forefront of their minds when they're looking at the dollar signs.
let me ask you one final question. The Board of Supervisors in Stafford County, they're not your boss.
Correct.
You are elected. This is a constitutional position in Stafford County. You are the Commissioner of Revenue, and so is the Treasurer. Those two positions are unique to Stafford. Well, not so much unique, but there was a unique. I remember years ago, and this may have been 15 years ago, that you schooled me and said that Stafford County has the best form of government in Virginia.
Correct. We still
And that
do.
is because because they elect you, right?
That's right.
And that's the only reason, right?
Well, we clearly have the smartest voters in Stafford.
Right.
In
There you go.
Virginia.
You talk about eloquent. That's the eloquent way to put it. But at any rate, the supervisors, they're not your boss.
Yeah.
So we reported that you do biannual assessments at the request of the Board of Supervisors.
Correct.
Should these assessments be done annually?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it comes up here about every 4 or 5 years. We take another look at it. And it again depends on the philosophy of the board and how they set the tax rates. Since Stafford County, we've kind of ingrained the effective rate in the minds of our taxpayers and board members. And if that's the case, then it doesn't really make sense to go through that annual expense. You look at a place like Fairfax County, where they don't have an elected commissioner of revenue, nobody's talking about the effective rate. So there, they pretend it doesn't exist, do the bare minimum, keep that rate level from one year to the next, and then it is the assessment office that is generating the increase in revenue. So they have a vested interest in doing an annual reassessment, getting those values up as high as they can, because the board really isn't taking much political heat in that case. It's being shifted off to the assessment office. So from our perspective, it really doesn't justify the cost because we view budgeting and setting taxation differently than a county that doesn't have elected finance officials.
And finally, if someone has an issue with their assessment, if they simply say that this is too much, I don't agree with this, or in the odd case, hey, listen, I want to pay more. How come you didn't assess me at more? I need to give more of my hard-earned money to the county. They have until March 8th to come and file an appeal. Is that correct?
Yeah, you have until March 8th, which is kind of a tight window since notices just went out, but we don't turn anybody away. And we encourage people to come in if they have any questions or just want to know how we arrived at our value. It's very much an education process. But we do what's called mass appraisal, which is different than a bank appraisal. It's very similar in many ways, but very different in that we can't get to the level of detail that your bank appraiser does. So we're using statistical analysis and those types of things, which means sometimes we miss stuff. You know, we may think you have a finished basement, but you don't. We may think that addition that you started 5 years ago was finished, and it may not be. Yeah, if you either just want to know what we're doing or you have some information that we might not know, we want to hear from you. And we change about 30 or 40% of the assessments that are appealed for those very reasons. I preach to my folks, and it's hard because we're all competitive. We want to win the argument, but that's not what an appeal is. An appeal is both of our last chances, the taxpayer and us, to get to the right value of that property, because once that value's set, it's set for 2 years.
Scott Mayausky is the Commissioner of the Revenue for Stafford County, Virginia. Scott, thanks for coming on Potomac Local and talking to us about
Thank
this
you.
important issue that has so many people talking this time of year.
No, I thank you, and I want to also thank you for covering local government. It is much needed. It is becoming an underserved part of the media, but I appreciate all you're doing to try and hold us accountable and educate the folks in the region. So thank you.
And thank you for making it interesting, giving us something to talk about.
All right.
Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks. You too.